The title of Duke of Rothesay and the other Scottish titles which I've had the honour to carry for so long, I now pass to Catherine.
The pen moved only once, yet that single stroke altered the balance of the monarchy. Behind a locked door at Windsor Castle, King Charles signed a decree granting Catherine unprecedented authority over the future direction of the crown. No public announcement had been prepared. No family vote had been taken. And when the document was finally placed before William, Camilla, and the senior royals, the silence revealed something terrifying. Charles had already made the decision irreversible. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles watched every face before lowering his hand. Catherine sat opposite him, tense, while Prince William stared at the crimson folder. Queen Camilla remained rigid beside the monarch. Princess Anne and Prince Edward had surrendered their phones outside, and the aides waited beyond the doors. No one could slow what had begun. The room seemed colder, but nobody dared look toward the locked entrance. The king opened the folder and named the Royal Continuity Decree. This was a royal order designed to guide the monarchy through a transfer of power. By signing it, he appointed Catherine as guardian of the crown's future, giving her authority over royal standards, family representation, succession preparation, and working royals during any transition. The decree did not change who would inherit the throne. William remained the heir, but it placed his wife at the centre of preparing his reign. William read the first page twice. Pride crossed his face, then vanished beneath alarm. His father had elevated Catherine without warning. She kept her hands locked beneath the table, understanding that the honour carried danger. Relatives with decades of service would now answer to her, and every decision could divide the family. Camilla broke the silence. She asked why the order had been drafted in secret, and why she had learned of it only after the signature. Charles set down the pen. The monarch said the crown could no longer survive divided loyalties, and the Queen Consort's expression tightened. Anne pulled the document closer and found a private appendix, an added section containing powers absent from the main decree. She asked when those powers would begin. Charles answered at once. They had already begun. Catherine opened the appendix. One senior royal's name appeared beneath restrictions covering access, duties, and influence. William saw it over her shoulder. Camilla saw his reaction. In that instant, the appointment stopped feeling ceremonial and became deeply personal. But before Catherine could understand why Charles had placed such power in her hands, she had to face the people who believed that power had been taken from them. The decree was written in formal language, but its consequences were painfully personal. For Catherine, it was a burden she had never publicly requested. For William, it was both an endorsement and a warning. For Camilla, it felt like a door closing without explanation. And for Charles, the decision carried the weight of a confession he could not yet make. Around one table, 5 royals confronted 5 different versions of what loyalty to the crown truly meant. Catherine left the room carrying authority she had never asked to possess. Years of disciplined duty had taught her how to remain calm during family crises, public pressure, and private grief. But this was different. Charles had made her guardian of the crown's future, a role giving her responsibility for protecting royal standards and preparing the family for the next reign. He trusted her because she had repeatedly placed the institution above personal comfort, yet that trust now threatened to isolate her from the very people she was expected to protect. William followed her into a private corridor and waited until the doors closed behind them. The prince asked whether his father had warned her before the meeting. Catherine answered no. Then she admitted that the king had questioned her several weeks earlier, asking whether she would choose family harmony or the monarchy's survival if both could not be saved. She had refused to answer then. Now the future king understood that the conversation had been a test, and any mistake made by his wife would one day be used against them both. Camilla remained behind long after the others had left. Charles had barely looked at her, and his silence hurt more than the decree itself. When Princess Anne entered, the Queen Consort asked whether everyone had known except her. Anne answered that nobody had known, but she also admitted that she understood the choice. Catherine had shown restraint when others reacted from fear, and that honesty left Camilla wounded rather than reassured. The Princess Royal stayed beside her, yet neither woman pretended the resentment had disappeared. Edward finally broke the uncertainty through a documented briefing note, kept with the signed order. Prince Edward explained that 2 constitutional advisors had witnessed the decree weeks earlier. These advisors were specialists who helped ensure royal decisions remained workable within the monarchy's established rules. Charles had not acted in sudden anger. He had protected the plan carefully, waiting only for the final signature. Catherine returned to the appendix and discovered her first responsibility. She would review every senior working royal's private privileges, including access to sensitive letters, royal residences, and future state planning. William saw her expression change. The prince realised this power had not been created only to prepare his wife for the future. Something had already gone wrong inside the family, and his father had built the decree to stop it from happening again. And the truth lay not in the document Charles had signed, but in the private incident that had convinced him the monarchy could no longer continue as before. Every royal rupture has a moment that appears insignificant, until history looks back and recognises the warning. For Charles, that moment came during a private succession rehearsal at Buckingham Palace. A confidential plan meant for only 4 people appeared in the hands of someone who had never been authorised to see it. Catherine discovered the breach. William demanded answers, and before the night ended, the king understood that the greatest danger to continuity was not outside the palace. It was already moving through its corridors. 3 months before the decree, Charles had ordered a confidential rehearsal covering the first 72 hours of William's eventual accession. The exercise was designed to prepare the family for the moment the future king inherited the throne, including urgent duties, public messages, household changes, and the protection of the younger royals. Only the king, William, Catherine, and Princess Anne were permitted to read the complete framework. That restriction mattered because one leaked page could expose private fears, planned roles, and divisions the palace had fought to conceal. Catherine approached the task with quiet discipline. She assessed how George, Charlotte, and Louis would be protected, how royal staff would respond, and how the family could remain united during a sudden transfer of power. Charles read her recommendations twice. The monarch admired their restraint, then ordered every page sealed because the plan touched the most sensitive question in the monarchy. Who would hold influence when his reign ended? Catherine approached the task with quiet discipline. She assessed how George, Charlotte, and Louis would be protected, how royal staff would respond, and how the family could remain united during a sudden transfer of power. Charles read her recommendations twice. The monarch admired their restraint, then ordered every page sealed because the plan touched the most sensitive question in the monarchy. Who would hold influence when his reign ended? The warning arrived the following evening. During a formal reception, Catherine noticed Camilla's private secretary carrying a copied page from the framework. She removed it without causing a public disturbance and confronted the aide inside an empty anteroom. The Princess of Wales demanded to know who had authorised the copy. The secretary hesitated, then named the Queen Consort. Camilla faced Charles before midnight. She insisted that she had requested only enough information to protect him and understand what would happen to her household under William. The king heard the fear in her voice, but the secrecy cut deeper than the curiosity. She had bypassed him, and that choice made affection feel dangerously close to unauthorised power. William's anger erupted soon afterward. The prince accused his father of allowing private influence to replace clear authority. Charles answered sharply, warning him not to confuse concern with betrayal. Yet later, the monarch sat alone with the copied page and understood that his son was not fighting for control. He was terrified that unclear boundaries could poison his future reign before it even began. Anne delivered the final truth during a recorded private consultation with her brother. The Princess Royal told him that no one had been formally empowered to defend the line between marriage, loyalty, duty, and institutional survival. Charles then chose Catherine because she had found the breach, protected the secret, and refused to exploit Camilla's humiliation. When Camilla finally understood that one private mistake had reshaped her place in the monarchy, she demanded to hear the verdict directly from Catherine. There were no courtiers inside the room, no secretaries to soften the language, and no king to interrupt what needed to be said. Camilla entered, believing Catherine had accepted power at her expense. Catherine entered, knowing that silence would be mistaken for guilt. Between them stood years of restraint, suspicion, and carefully managed appearances. Then Camilla moved a chair away from the table, sat directly opposite her, and asked the question no one else had dared to voice. Camilla had requested the meeting at Clarence House, insisting that the conversation remain private. Catherine agreed only after making one condition clear: no aides, no written notes, and no recordings. Clarence House was the Queen Consort's official London residence, but inside that closed room it carried no protection. Titles could not soften what had happened. Both women knew the decree had already changed their relationship. Camilla spoke first. She said she understood why the monarchy needed preparation for William's reign, but she could not accept being judged through an order she had never been allowed to challenge. Catherine answered calmly that the decree belonged to Charles. She had not requested the authority, written the clauses, or chosen the timing. Yet the Queen Consort's anger did not fade, because responsibility and consequence were no longer the same thing. Camilla leaned forward and asked whether Catherine considered her untrustworthy. The Princess of Wales held the silence longer than comfort allowed. Then she said the breach had come from fear, not malice. But fear could still cause damage when it crossed a boundary. Camilla's expression hardened. She had wanted protection from an uncertain future, while Catherine had seen the same act as a threat to the future itself. Catherine finally admitted what she had hidden from everyone. The appointment frightened her. She did not want to become the woman blamed for every closed door, every restriction, and every painful decision. Still, she would not refuse a duty simply because accepting it might make her unpopular. Camilla heard resolve in those words, but she also heard something more dangerous. Catherine had already decided not to retreat. Camilla then revealed, through a documented private account of a conversation with Charles, that he had promised she would always be consulted on decisions affecting her royal position. The decree seemed to break that promise. Catherine opened the appendix, the added section containing the decree's immediate powers, and pointed to the relevant clause. The Queen Consort's ceremonial status remained untouched, but her access to succession papers and strategic meetings now required written approval. Camilla's anger gave way to hurt. Before leaving, she warned Catherine that one copied page could not explain powers this broad. Someone had encouraged Charles while the family remained unaware. That warning forced Catherine to look beyond the confrontation and toward the small circle of people who had helped Charles turn private fear into permanent authority. Charles had signed the decree alone, but he had not built it alone. Behind its polished language stood weeks of private consultations, handwritten amendments, and one relentless argument. Affection could no longer determine access to power. Catherine began tracing the document's origins, expecting to find ambitious courtiers. Instead, she found Anne, an exhausted king, and a private memorandum from William that changed her understanding of why Charles had acted before anyone could stop him. Catherine met Princess Anne in the late Queen's former sitting room, carrying a copy of the decree beneath her arm. The Princess Royal had chosen the room because Charles had first discussed the plan there, away from advisors and family pressure. Anne explained that the king had requested a framework capable of protecting stability without altering the lawful succession, the legal order deciding who inherits the throne. William would still become monarch. The new position existed to ensure the institution reached that moment without being weakened by private influence. Anne spoke with the certainty of someone who had challenged every soft clause. She had insisted that the guardian's authority be earned through duty, not granted by age or blood seniority. Catherine connected 3 generations: Charles's present reign, William's future leadership, and the lives of George, Charlotte, and Louis beyond them. That made her valuable. It also made her vulnerable. Catherine's composure broke when Anne placed a private memorandum before her. William had submitted it weeks earlier, arguing that his future consort needed clear authority before a national or family crisis erupted. The prince had never written his wife's name, but the meaning was unmistakable. He had helped shape the burden now resting on her shoulders. William faced Catherine later that evening. He admitted he had hidden the memorandum because he believed she would reject the role to preserve peace inside the family. The future king insisted he had tried to protect her from making an impossible choice. Catherine answered that protection without consent could become another kind of betrayal. He had trusted her strength while denying her the right to decide how that strength should be used. Anne then showed Catherine the king's handwritten amendment. It stated that the guardian could privately challenge even the sovereign when a decision threatened continuity. The role was not ceremonial. It gave her the right to confront the monarch himself. A second clause allowed her to suspend access to confidential planning whenever trust had been compromised. Charles had underlined 2 words in dark ink: without exception. Catherine understood the cost immediately. Her first review removed one royal household from the forthcoming Strategic Council. The decision reached Camilla before Charles could explain it, turning policy into humiliation within minutes. The decree had begun as a safeguard on paper, but the first name removed from the council proved that Catherine's authority could now alter lives in real time. The monarchy did not feel different when the decree was signed. It felt different when the first door remained closed. Camilla arrived for the Crown Strategy Council, expecting her usual place beside Charles, only to find her name absent from the attendance card. Catherine had approved a smaller meeting under the new security rules. Charles had allowed it. And as Camilla stood before the sealed entrance, the humiliation of the decree became something far more painful than formal language. Catherine's first decision had reduced the gathering to Charles, William, Anne, Edward, and herself. While the document breach was formally reviewed, the Crown Strategy Council was a private meeting used to prepare the monarchy for future crises and changes of reign. Because the discussion concerned succession readiness rather than public ceremony, Catherine believed every person inside needed unquestioned clearance. The restriction was temporary, but it began immediately. That made the decision feel less like caution and more like judgment. Camilla read the attendance card without speaking. She folded it once, handed it back, and walked away with her dignity intact. Inside the room, Charles heard her footsteps fading along the corridor. The king did not rise. He kept both hands on the table and told himself that remaining seated protected the process. Yet every second of silence made his choice feel more personal. William noticed the strain on his father's face, while Catherine understood that the first use of her authority had already wounded someone. Camilla confronted Charles after the council ended. She asked whether being his wife still carried trust, or whether the decree had reduced their marriage to ceremony. The monarch answered that he loved her, but love could not become automatic clearance into every matter of the crown. The queen consort heard the distinction, yet it offered no comfort. To her, the closed door proved that affection and influence had finally been separated, and she had been left on the weaker side. Catherine then received a documented security review that exposed an older breach. Another copied paper had circulated months before the succession rehearsal, proving the recent incident was not the beginning. The earlier document concerned future residence arrangements after William became king. Staff inside Camilla's household had passed it between themselves because they feared losing their homes, duties, and positions when the next reign began. Catherine felt the entire crisis shift beneath her. Camilla had crossed a boundary, but frightened employees and uncertain futures had fueled the secrecy. Charles had also avoided explaining what would happen, allowing fear to grow where clear leadership should have stood. The Princess of Wales realised she had been given power to manage consequences while the king escaped the hardest conversations. For the first time since receiving the decree, Catherine stopped asking what authority Charles had given her, and began asking what responsibility he had tried to escape. Catherine entered the king's private library carrying the decree, but she did not sit when Charles invited her to. There were no lawyers, no household officials, and no family members waiting beyond the door. Only a father-in-law, a future queen, and the cost of a decision neither could undo. Catherine placed the document on his desk and told Charles that she would serve the crown, but she would not become the shield behind which he avoided painful conversations with his own family. Charles felt the accusation before he answered it. Catherine told him the guardian role could only survive if the family saw it as a stabilising duty, not a weapon aimed at Camilla or anyone who disagreed with the palace. The guardian was the person charged with protecting royal standards and preparing the monarchy for transition. If that authority became linked with punishment, every decision Catherine made would deepen the very divisions she had been asked to prevent. The king admitted the truth slowly. Every attempt to discuss future boundaries had become tangled with marriage, guilt, loyalty, and his fear of appearing